Hey, no need to adjust your screen. It's still the same podcast, but maybe with a little twist. Let's call it Coffee with Chris, but just for a moment. I'm Chris Lovelady, and I'm the Revenue Operations Team Lead with RepairPal, now Yelp. Today, I'm going to sit in the seat of interviewer. And don't worry, Kathleen hasn't gone far. She's sitting in the seat of interviewee, and that's because she graciously agreed to my interview request. I'm both a listener and a fan of the podcast and Kathleen's work. I wanted to share my curiosity and some kindness after listening to it with each of you. So with that said, welcome to Coffee with Chris and Kathleen in a different kind of podcast episode. Thanks, Kathleen, for agreeing to this.
Hello, cheers. Look
Cheers.
at all this lipstick, record levels of lipstick on the cup today.
And yet everything still matches.
Yeah, I try.
First, thank you for doing this today.
Oh, I'm excited.
I'm excited to hear these answers, quite honestly. And I wanted to start with a story. This is a story that you had written to your team, us, when Yelp acquired RepairPal. When that acquisition happened, you informed us, and then you told us a story that's like sitting with me even months later, and I was hoping you could talk about it. It involves a recruiter who believed in you, a plane ticket, a job interview in the Bay Area, and then insufficient cash to make it back to the airport.
Oh, yeah.
Can you tell this story?
Yes. So once upon a time, I lived in a land far, far away, which is to say Reno, Nevada. And this is before I moved to the Bay. And then, of course, I lived in the Bay for years, and now I live in Denver. But anyway, I lived in Reno, and I worked for Intuit. And I had a boss once at Intuit that was one of my only female bosses that I've ever had working a professional job, believe it or not. I've worked for men many times in my career. And so she was awesome. And she left. And when she left Intuit, she said, the logical successor for me in my position is you. And so she kind of set that up for me. And that was a step level change in my career. She's amazing. And anyway, she became a recruiter. And so then she contacted me and she said, hey, I've got this job opportunity, but it's in the San Francisco Bay Area. And for a variety of reasons, I really felt like, it was time for a change. We needed to move. Reno is a little, people think of Vegas this way, but Reno also has some of the same issues where it's got a very kind of party lifestyle. And for people who maybe have a problem with that, not the greatest atmosphere always. And so for my family, I really felt like it might be the best option to move away from there, like Beverly Hillbilly style or whatever. So I was really into, having this job interview, but I didn't have any money to get to a job interview or whatnot. And the job was going to reimburse me later for whatever the expenses were, but I didn't even have the money to sort of put up front to go in the first place. So she is my wonderful former boss and now recruiter for this job. She bought me the plane ticket. She attempted to rent me a car. But what I discovered when I arrived in the Bay Area is that no one else can rent you a car. Like you have to have your own credit card that they can then, charge the $400 or whatever the dollars were. And then they give those back to you if you don't wreck the car or whatever. But anyway, so I wasn't able to get the car. And so I had maybe $50 in my pocket or whatever. And so I needed to get to the interview. And so I got into a cab and I said to the cab driver, this is, a metered cab, like old days, right? So it's a metered cab. And I said to the guy, I said, well, I need to get to Palo Alto and I have, from the San Francisco airport, I said, I have $50. So when the meter hits $50, please stop and drop me off there. And then I will just have to walk the rest of the way. And he was a really nice guy. And I kind of told him, I'm here for a job interview. This is all the money I have, and so on. And he's like, look, I'll just turn the meter off when it hits $50 and take you like the rest of the way. It's not a big deal. So the meter hit $50 in like Redwood City or something like that. So it's a good thing that he decided to do that, because it's pretty impossible to walk from Redwood City to Palo Alto. Anyway, he took me the whole way. He was like my best friend by this time. Not a good enough friend to pick me up after the job interview, but I figured that's a problem for future Kathleen. That is not a problem for current Kathleen. Current Kathleen just needs to walk into this company, nail the job interview, and worry about that later. So I went in. I had a whole day of interviews. Luckily, like, they took me to lunch. They paid for it. I was fed and watered and all those things. And so then afterward, they said, oh, okay, do you have a cab coming for you or whatever? And I'm like, yeah, I have a ride coming in. Thank you so much. Gathered my items. And then I went outside, and when no one was looking, they were right next to a Fry's Electronics. I went into Fry's Electronics and I hid in the bathroom. So that they would think that I was gone, because you can't just kind of wait out in front. And I thought, what am I going to do? Well, nearby, there's like this little Foot Locker place. And so I went to the Foot Locker, and there were some people hanging out in front of the Foot Locker. And I said, hey, I got to get to the San Francisco airport. Is there any way any of you could drive me a little closer to the San Francisco airport? And they were like, yeah, we could take you to the Santa Clara bus depot. So they took me to the Santa Clara bus depot, where it was only $1.25 to hop on the bus and then take the bus to the San Francisco airport. And so they did that. And they gave me the $1.25 because I really literally had no money in my pocket. And I paid the $1.25, took the bus to the airport. And then when I got to the airport, it's funny, but I ran into a team member that was currently working for me at the job that I already had. And he was like, hey, what are you doing here in the airport? And I was sort of like, oh, well, don't tell anyone, but I came here for a job interview. And he's like, oh, how funny. Me too. And so he's like, let's go have a drink. And I'm like, I don't have any money. So anyway, my employee bought me a drink. And then afterward, I also didn't have anybody to pick me up from the airport, because things weren't going great between me and my husband at the time, which is part of the reason why I had no credit, no money. It's kind of a long story, but he had, so gambling and other problems, and which is why I was so broke. So anyway, I called another employee from a thing called a payphone, for those of you that remember what those things are. And another employee on my team actually took me home afterward. So totally nailed the job interview, got the job.
Of course you did.
And then, I asked them for a signing and moving bonus, which gave me the money to move. And so that was awesome. And of course, they reimbursed everything. And I was able to pay back the recruiter. I will never be able to pay her back for the difference she made in my life. But I was able to actually pay her back the money that she had fronted, because she believed in me. And so, that's the thing is, people have lives, and people have things going on in their lives. And we have a lot of shame around like what you can afford or not afford. And as somebody who rose from frontline to the executive table and worked my way up, which most people do not do that, by the way. Like, most people get out of working for a good college and they kind of step into an executive position, or they step into being a senior director and are promoted from there, whatever. Most people don't work their way from a call center to the executive table, because that's just not a thing that happens very often. And so, but when you do that, there is an income level or an expectation that I've noticed that people want you to have before you can step into that next thing. And while I made a decent income, and Intuit was certainly fine and generous with their pay, as they still are, the problem was that something else was going on in my home and family system that made it so that I didn't have literally any money. And so, but that changed the whole trajectory of my life, becoming like more of a Bay Area tech person, and able to build my career from there and things like that. And PayCycle, which is the company that I came to work for, was an amazing, incredible place in terms of the the culture and the things that they built. And they were really the ones that taught me, like, what is culture and how do you build culture and how do you think about it? But I don't mind retelling that story, and I like telling it to people because I don't ever want to not be the girl that had to hitchhike-ish her way back to the airport after a job interview. And the reason why I don't want to lose track of that girl is because I know that so many people, as they're building their careers or thinking about things or whatever, that they have financial insecurity, and that's something that, comes to play at work, because we don't just get to shed, all of our problems at the door when we start work for the day.
Usually in my work meetings, I always want to put, like, because a lot of what we do obviously is virtual, I always want to give an emoji, and right here is an immediate heart that I want to like shoot into the air.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that. But yeah, and it is a pretty fun story. And actually, I ended up telling it to the executive team at PayCycle. Probably, I think like 4 years later, I actually won an award at the company. They were giving out an award we had a CEO that was really a very strong culture leader. His name was Rene Lacerte, and he had left the company to go found a different company, Bill.com. And when he did that, we had a new CEO, and we created an award called the Rene Lacerte Spirit Award. And so I was the second annual Rene Lacerte Spirit Award winner. And so when I won that award and things like that, I sort of told everybody, hey, did you ever hear the story of like what happened when I first, went to my job interview here or whatever, or what difficulty I had? And they felt bad, of course, because they were like, well, if we'd known that, we would have paid for your cab back to the airport and things like that. But of course, I didn't want them to know that I had that kind of financial insecurity or to have any drama or things that they had to do. And I'm a person who wants to make a way out of no way type thing. And so I was like, oh, I'll figure it out. Somebody will be kind and will help me out in this situation. And that's exactly what happened, right? Like, I know you hear horror stories about people getting into cars with strangers, but I've always found strangers to be extraordinarily kind. And this was no exception.
So so you just already touched on some takeaways that I had from that story, and there's a lot that still swirls with me, like when I think about it. And I was hoping you could comment on these. The first one is, there's this, like, implicit in it is there's this sense of adventure about you. Like, this is what's happening. This is the scenario. It seems like most people would immediately sort of freeze or be uncomfortable or say, I'm just not going to do this. But that's not what happened with you. It's like, this is what's happening now. This is what I'm going to do. And then you put it into action. The second takeaway I had is, I don't want that sense of adventure to like gloss over the real truth that you're talking about, which is that too many people, women with children included, are living with the dangerous and life-altering consequences of poverty. And then 3, which is something you brought up too, which I think is so important, is I have never heard an executive level decision maker tell a story like that. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I would say, one of the things that I've had to work really hard to overcome is my own shame and the stigma around not having enough money, right? So I grew up in financial insecurity, and we were often on welfare, and I got, reduced. I was the reduced cost or free lunch kid. Right. And so, in fact, I had so much shame around it in elementary school that I used to volunteer to work in the kitchen during my lunch recess. So I was doing dishes and other things. And so I would tell the kids that I got free lunch because I worked in the kitchen. I didn't have to work in the kitchen. They would have just given me the free lunch because financially we qualified for it. But I didn't want people to know that financially we qualified for it. So I worked in the kitchen as a way of obfuscating the fact that my family didn't have money. So I always felt that. Another year I was on student council, and they adopted, a kid from the Giving Tree to buy them a gift. Well, they adopted my sister from the Giving Tree. And so I dropped off of student council because I didn't want to be at the door of the house presenting the gift to my own family, my own sister, off of the Giving Tree. So I have always had a fair amount of stigma around that. And I have found that in the places where they're probably the most sticky for me as a person, or for me to share, the most vulnerable. That's the place of greatest strength for someone else. Because anything that we feel really, really vulnerable about, or that is really hard or difficult for us or whatever, is probably the most powerful part of our story. So I've made it a point to try to talk about those things and to try to own those things. Now I'm in a position where I have a platform and people occasionally hear or elsewhere listen to what I have to say. And so I think there's power in me owning what for a majority of my life was a certain amount of financial insecurity that I've had.
I just feel like when I hear you tell these things, they really move me too. Like when you talk about these things, like incorporating how it made you feel and then what you do about it now. I recall like a previous episode where you talked about, why was I given these talents? And the why wasn't the important question. It's the what am I going to do with it now that's the important, kind of aspect of where you're at in your life. And I just thought that's super beautiful.
Oh, thanks. I mean, yeah, that's what's accessible to us, right? I mean, we'll never figure out the why, or why certain things have happened. We assign meaning to things ultimately. Sure. But, in that sense, I guess I am lucky that, I had the childhood that I did and that we moved around so much and we were so mobile and things like that. And I will say my mother was also very creative at figuring out solutions to problems. The car would break down in some town, and we wouldn't have a home and we wouldn't have any money. And the car's now broken down. We were trying to move somewhere else and she'd just be like, okay, we live here now. And then she would find some ramshackle apartment building and she would figure out who the owner was. And she'd say, well, you're going to let us live here for free. And in exchange, we're going to fix it up. And then that landlord guy would be like, okay. And then for the summer, us kids would be running around, replacing screens, mowing lawns, painting apartment units, like sprucing them up, making them nicer. They'd be able to charge higher rent to people or rent out the other units. And we'd live there for free for 3 months until we figured out the car situation and we were able to move or whatever. And so when you grow up like that at the time, I'm not going to, it feels romantic. Like when you think about it as a past, like kind of movie-esque or whatever, but in the moment, like it sucked. It definitely sucked. But now as an adult, like I have a belief that most problems can be solved. And that's because, I have that background. Right. And so, that's the point of it. The point of it years later is that it's made me a resilient, like sort of adventuresome, problems can be solved kind of person rather than like being knocked on my ass by most problems. So,
but it's not just, awesome. I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry to cut you off, but it's not just that. It's also that you're great at solving them. Like there's so many times it's like, I know you can speak to 3 things that I say, or I know you can speak to like a ton of different things because I watch you at work. Like I watch that you're, like I know you're juggling hundreds, if not thousands of conversations every month. I know that you're capable of speaking to like corporate finance, accounting, like vision, the different changes in the Repair Pal site, the updates, the work with like employees. You're doing all of that. And then you can talk about poetry, literature, popular culture, Schrodinger's cat, Dua Lipa. Like I've seen all of these references in work, like chats. And I'm just like, how does she do all of these things? It's like, I do think you're truly gifted, but I also think that you've cultivated this, and how you've cultivated is what I'm also really like interested in, like how you cultivated it. And then not only that you're great at solving problems, but that you've made that talent work for you. Like not everybody who's intellectually talented can make it work for them. And you do. So I guess those are sort of like 2 back-to-back questions.
Thanks. Yeah, so I'm curious and I'm interested in the world that I live in. Also, I have benefit that my son is super hip, to be honest. He sends me songs and he's like, Mom, you're going to love this. Like, you really need to check this out. So he keeps me in, certain things so I don't have to work as hard. And I'm really grateful for our relationship because for so many reasons, but that being one of them. And I do also have friends of many different ages. And also my friends are cool as hell. Like, so I have plenty of friends that like share things with me, or like this movie or that thing, or, you know, going and doing stuff that introduce me to things all the time. I'm also a reader, so that's just something that I enjoy. So I read and do things, and then I'm just paying attention. Like I love, you know, being part of different conversations or what people have to say or whatever. And the more we're present in life, the more we're ready to receive like what people have. And I'm very curious about it. And so I learned lots of this stuff just from all the people that I have connections with, which is ultimately, it's kind of the point of everything, I think, is the connections. So
I hope everyone sees here, and just like in previous episodes or just your everyday life, that you're just this like really beautifully authentic person. Like when you show up in meetings, or like I just see you on the day to day, or you're just, you know, navigating your life. I just, you know, I've already told you this, but I'm just such a fanboy, man, whatever, however you want to describe it. And I think that authenticity is so cool. And I think it's really important, but I also want to acknowledge, like in popular culture, I feel like there's almost like a what I feel like anyway is an anti-authenticity backlash. Like how things are or how they were, that doesn't really matter. What matters is that we work towards something that's like easy, you know, slim, unblemished, clear, however problematically you want to define that. And that feeling that you're having, like if you don't feel that way, you should be working towards covering it. And then by covering it, you're doing other people a service, because other people don't really care how you present or feel. And you're sort of like this authentic like person who just brings themselves every day and tells stories like you told. I guess what I'm asking is like, can you make the case both like from a personal perspective and then from a business perspective about why authenticity is so important given kind of the cultural moment we're in?
yeah, I think so. And I think a lot of times when people think about being authentic, they think about being like really super raw. And maybe there's a moment for that. But I also think that if we're leaders or teachers, that yes, authenticity is important, but we also don't want to overly burden people. So they say it's best to like teach from the scars, not from the open wounds, for example. So if there's something that I haven't fully integrated or processed yet or whatever, then I try to have that thing show up in the appropriate container, AKA like with my therapist or with the person that I'm conflicting with or whatever, as opposed to having it show up everywhere, right? Because when we're just kind of unfiltered and we're not really aware and we're not trying to put our best foot forward in a particular way, then I think what happens as leaders is that causes other people to have to carry that stuff for us, because we have both sort of, you know, we have the emotions, we have the problems, we have the things, and we also have the power, which sets up a dynamic that's not healthy because it makes other people have to carry that. So I do think authenticity is super important because that's how people relate. That's how they connect. I genuinely like people, and I think people know that. And I'm genuinely an imperfect person, and everyone is. And I have enough room and enough leverage, and I'm lucky. I work in an environment that supports me being myself as well. So I think that's helpful. And having said that, I also am conscious of, you know, trying not to lay too much of like my BS at other people's doorsteps, because that's the danger of, you know, some of that authenticity, particularly in the moment where things are happening. Like there's a moment where I'm, you know, maybe scared, or, you know, like where this transition is happening, you know, and I'm working around the clock to try to make the acquisition happen, and I'm really tired and I'm this, that. I think it's okay to share with people, hey, I'm working really hard and I'm tired, so I might not show up, but I don't want to make people carry that for me. So there's a place where authenticity stops also, and where leadership steps in so that displaying leadership qualities, even while we're being real. And I try to navigate. It's a balance, and I don't always succeed also. But I try to navigate that line. Having said that, it's really important because the more pressure that you're under, or the more things that you have on your plate or whatever, you are going to leak out the edges. So if you're trying to put up a false front or whatever, you are going to leak out. And that leakage is going to be yucky, right? It's going to be toxic probably because you weren't able to sort of carry that along with everything else that you had going on. So it's just much easier to be authentic. And plus, then you have space for other things, because the more of a front that you have to put up, the more energy that takes, and then the less energy that you have for all the other stuff that you're trying to accomplish.
I think it's interesting you said that, that leakage part can be detected by other people, and so can your love for other people also be detected too. So it's like those things are also sort of like, in truth, always sort of there, and that people, they're kind of taking in that the whole part of you is maybe, it's an interesting thought I actually haven't really thought about in a while. Okay, I'm going to jump to some more business stuff. I wanted to talk about authentic people in business, but these are people that might not be taken seriously. And I don't mean, I want to frame the question correctly, because I want to ask you, how do people, authentic, serious people who aren't traditionally taken seriously, like, can you give them some guidance in the workplace or in work in general? And by serious, I mean people that feel like they have something to say, not that they take themselves seriously, but feel like their message or their work or their contribution is important.
Yeah, I mean, I do think to some extent the reality is that you've got to cultivate some sort of an image. You have to have a story. And you've got to present yourself confidently. And those are important for leaders. And so, for example, I have a friend, and she is brilliant, and she has a baby voice. That's just the way her voice is, right? And so she kind of talks like this. And it makes it harder because she has a very sort of feminine, like whispery almost voice. It makes it very difficult for people to take her as seriously because they're just processing that. And she's also diminutive in size, and she's female. So, oh my God, like plus. Like Mike Tyson can have like that very high pitched voice or whatever. People take it seriously because he's physically imposing. So there is something to how we show up, physically, how we show up verbally, how we, right. And you've got to account for that as you are creating your image. So like when I was working on getting promoted, I would think about how I was dressing or presenting myself. So I used to dress more conservatively as a way of offsetting the fact that, I have a very colorful personality, whether or not like I'm dressing colorfully or not or what. So I used to dress a little more conservatively, the suit jackets and things like that, so that I, could be taken seriously. And if I'm in a serious forum, if I'm in a courtroom or I'm in a board, a boardroom of like when we went to go visit our partner, Castrol, and I knew I was going to be in the boardroom with executives that were coming from London and other international places, Frankfurt, to meet with us. And that they were really serious professionals, and you want that edge, then I'm going to wear, the black blazer in that sense. And I love the blazer and I love the way it fits. And so there's nothing sort of inauthentic about it either, but it is a bit of a uniform. So I think, you're going to think about those pieces that are going to help you convey what you want to convey. And they still need to feel okay for you. It can't be, total left turn or whatever, but you're going to have to do that so that your message has a place. And then, ultimately you need to speak to it. And sometimes, you need to set the table. And so like for my friend that has that at times when she's going to give a big presentation, she says, look, I know that I have a really soft voice, but I've got some really interesting insights to share. So please, you're going to want to pay close attention to what I have to say. And so she has to confidently own that. She has to explain that a little bit. And then people will lean in and they'll listen more by just simple fact of the fact that she told them to. So if we understand that we have those impediments to people really taking us seriously, then we can do that. I might say to someone, yeah, I have a pretty joking or funny personality, but I really know my shit. And then I can go in and I can say, whatever, because I do know it.
You do know.
I do know it. So I don't have to do that as much anymore because, I've been able to, to navigate executive spaces for quite some time. And because I come across as really confident, but I used to have to do that all the time.
This is a great time to transition into some business like shorthand that I feel like I've heard in my working career. And I was hoping you could speak to this, like, I'm not sure if they're aphorisms, heuristics, whatever, but I feel like I hear it often. And I was hoping you could just speak to each little like snippet.
Yeah.
First one is fake it till you make it.
Yeah. I don't love that because it's the opposite of being authentic. And when you're nervous or whatever, people can tell that anyway. So if you're pretending like you're not nervous, it's awkward. So, we were talking about that earlier, how I said, I love people and they know it. That's because we have mirror neurons, right? And I picture these as like being on our foreheads or whatever, although they're probably not. And so we're going to match and mirror what we're getting from people, right? So I think it's easier to hold an intention as opposed to faking it. So like when I'm in an airport and I'm feeling stressed because my flight's delayed or these other things, and I think, oh, everybody's probably feeling stress, right? So then I hold an intention around like calm, loving presence. Maybe I'm not totally feeling that, but I'm holding an intention around it. So I think you can still hold an intention around confidence or hold an intention around executive presence or power or whatever the thing is that we're trying to have without totally like faking it and putting on the mask around it and all of that. And eventually, those things will come. And we can even state the intention, right? Like, so my intention is, to tell you about X, Y, or Z today. And for you to take this as, sort of a confident, professional, well thought out presentation, because, ultimately, I think this is a great idea for the company and may have a few nerves on board, but bear with me, right? Like, and then people will bear with you and you can make your way through it. The other thing that you don't want to do is you don't want to lean too far into the feeling either. So like if you're setting the table that you're a little nervous or something like that, like in a job interview setting or something like that, you can say, hey, it's been a long time since I interviewed. I'm a little rusty and a little nervous. And I have amazing things to share. I think I'm a great candidate for this position. So let's go. Don't spend like 5 minutes explaining why you're nervous. Like get it out, get it over, and then get into the content. But it helps to set the table a smidge, but it is setting the table. Don't make it take the whole meal up, like you still got to serve the meal and do that whole thing. So, and I think a lot of times people take that advice and then they sit in it. They're like, I'm really nervous. And no. And they start talking about how nervous they are. Like just set the table very quickly, move into the meal portion and then you'll find that your nerves fade and you can hold the intention around, being a confident person. I also think, to the extent that you need to feel confident or whatever, it's fine to have like a confidence ritual. And you can make one up if you want to, like, something that you want to hold on to, whatever, some little ritual that you practice ahead of time that's designed to make you feel more confident. I think that works really, really well.
Is it too late for me to set the table and say I was a little nervous to start this, but I really feel like you have so much to say. So I feel like this has already been so great.
Oh, well, I appreciate you stepping outside your comfort zone to share who you are because I just think everybody should know who you are because you're such an incredible person with the most amazing heart and you have an amazing story and amazing things to share too. So I'm really pleased that you did that. And for people who didn't catch your previous episode, I interviewed Chris about his lived experience on a different segment of this podcast. And that podcast won an award because Chris is awesome. So.
I care for you so much, and I just feel so lucky to work with and for you.
Well, thank you. The feeling is super mutual. So.
Okay. I got more.
Okay.
Move fast and break things.
To the extent that what we're breaking is something that didn't deserve to be built in the first place, like, so then fine. I do like to, there are certain things that I think, like, so if we're running tests on a website, or whatever, I think it's fine to, have fast follow kind of tests and like see what works or what doesn't or whatever. When the stakes are low, it's fine. Like if we're A/B testing a button color or let's not perseverate over it forever. Let's just do it. And I'm very much a like, yeah, let's get stuff done kind of person. The break things cannot be your team, cannot be your customers, cannot be, people's work-life balance, whatever that means. It cannot be, it shouldn't be any of that kind of stuff. And a lot of times I think we're in such a rush to just do something or do anything that actually what we're breaking is our team dynamic, our culture, our values. Like none of that stuff should be broken. And if we're not sure if something aligns, then it probably doesn't. And that bears some amount of thinking about it or bringing people along or whatever, because there's only so much change that people are going to be able to absorb or move. And so it really depends on, how big the change that we're trying to make is, and whether, we can break that down into little pieces that can be done quickly. But I do think there's a downside to just having that as a predominant mindset. And the downside is very rarely worth it. And oh, by the way, if we're not integrating and including people and all of that, then the studies show that like actually we're not making as much money and we're not as successful as a company and stuff like that anyways. So it's kind of a stupid piece of advice in that sense.
Speaking of making money, how about this one? The only thing that matters is the scoreboard.
Yeah, that's just total bullshit. I think if you take care of people and you have processes that make sense, and by taking care of people, I mean the people that work at the company, the customers, the community that you're a part of, whatever it is that makes sense, sort of inside and outside of your business, then the scoreboard takes care of itself. The scoreboard is just a reflection of how well you're playing, right? Like if you think about the sports metaphor, literally the scoreboard is, like some dude pushing a button every time someone, like rounds home base or whatever. So the scoreboard takes care of itself. If you've practiced, you have a well-functioning team and you're operating together as a unit, then you'll make scores. And that's how that works. So I'm a revenue leader. I have to keep track of and know how I'm trending. So I pay attention to the scoreboard. I mean, what coach or what leader doesn't? And I know my numbers and I understand my business. And I'm always interested in if there's different ways to like configure things or streamline things or whatever to where, we can do better or produce more. But ultimately, the way to do that is to do all of the right things and the next right thing and take care of people. And then they'll take care of the business and then you'll make the money and the scoreboard will reflect those efforts as opposed to the other way around.
Last one.
Okay.
And this one's been written about a lot, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on it too, that for women to be successful in the workplace, they need to lean in.
Yeah, I mean, there's certain things we should all, as human beings, lean into. But I also think there's spaces where we need to lean out. And it depends on who you are as a leader. So, because if you're leaning in too hard, then there isn't any room for your team or you're sacrificing your family or these other things. So I get why lean in as a concept exists. I think it acknowledges the reality that women in general, in order to achieve like CEO level positions and things like that, that they do have to work harder and they do have to produce more. Like if you show me a senior woman, I know she's spectacular at something, unless it was literally like nepotism or something like that, because she got to that position, which means that she had to work harder. So I do think it acknowledges that reality, and it's an unfortunate reality. But I also think as leaders, we need to be careful about that. So a lot of times, someone will say, well, what does Kathleen think? I don't share my opinion until everybody else has shared their opinion, or I purposely don't do something to see like what solutions the team's going to come up with so that I don't have to be in charge of that thing anymore. And I think about like, how do I create the life that I want? And by the way, the life that I want isn't just about working. And so, and then how do we band together as a community to create, more spaces for women in general and things like that, as a community, rather than thinking about how I need to do that like all by myself.
Yeah, that beauty of interdependence is so important. Okay, I have a final executive type question for you, and it involves maybe growth and what you're thinking about moving forward. The first, I guess it's got different parts to it, but the first part is how do you think your views as an executive have changed or evolved over the past 5 years? Like what specific growth points you identify, and then like, moving now and into the future, where do you still want to go?
Yeah, well, I think, going remote had probably a larger impact on me than anything I can think of recently, in terms of the way that I think about leadership and kind of what's possible and things like that. Like I learned the lesson that, really it requires a lot more repetition. So when you're not in person conveying something, it just requires a lot more persistence, repetition, and patience, because we just don't absorb things as well through these little screen doohickeys. It's just a reality. And so, just really thinking about, okay, I'm going to have to communicate and communicate and communicate and communicate. And then, it's put me on the road a bit more as well, because, just trying to create that in-person momentum, because there's really nothing like it. And it is really special. So then trying to replicate that remotely, it actually has freed me to be even more expressive, because I think the more expressive you are on a screen, the more interest you create, the more people are listening and maybe getting integrated to what you're doing. And that's cool. But I think it's really, really easy for little conflicts to arise and for people to become, sort of disconnected from their jobs, or to not feel as connected to the mission and things like that. So, so there is a more aspect to it. And so as a leader, like, thinking about really making sure there's space for that. And then I've been on a mindfulness journey for the last few years, as most people who know anything about me know. So I plan to continue that. And I think that every leadership situation is slightly different. And so it requires not us to be different people per se, although I do think that there's a lot of things that we tend to think about as being part of our fixed self that really aren't part of our fixed self. And so I don't know what the next big leadership challenge is going to require from me as a leader, but I do know that if I stay curious and connected, and open-minded, and I don't, I'm not in my super reactive mode or whatever. If I stay patient, then whatever the answer is, will manifest. And then that will be, the next thing to do. Right. And whatever that is consistent probably with something that I have. Then maybe I'm not the leader for that particular challenge either. And that's also fine, because that's why other leaders exist, right? To supplement us where we're not the right person for that particular challenge. And I'm super comfortable with not having to be the one for every single thing that comes along. That's why I have Chris Loveladies and others, that I work with, is because I'm not the right leader for every single thing, but probably I know someone who is, which is amazing.
which in many ways makes you the right, I guess it's so many ways. It's like, not only do you know, but you also know how to like cultivate talent, and turn like any mission or something into something really special. And I just think you're so talented, and I'm really appreciative of everything you've done for me and everything you've done just, like life wise. You've added a lot of like joy. So I really appreciate that.
Well, let's just keep having fun. And yeah,
Let's.
thank you so much. Cheers.
Yes.